There's a structure invisible for most people that's draining their bank account, stealing their time, crushing their spirit, and then convincing them they deserve it. And the most terrifying part, they're defending it. Dave sits in his cubicle staring at another email from management about efficiency improvements. Translation: do more work for the same pay while the CEO just bought his third vacation home. Dave scrolls through job postings at midnight, wondering why he feels stuck, despite working 60-hour weeks. He senses something's deeply wrong, but he can't quite name it. The system feels natural, inevitable, like gravity itself. But what if that feeling is the entire point? Part 1. The invisible cage we're all living in. Here's what nobody wants to admit: the hierarchical structures that organize our workplaces, our societies or religions, and even our own minds aren't neutral. They're not just harmless organizational charts or necessary evils. They're sophisticated machines designed to extract value from human beings while making them grateful for the opportunity. And understanding this might be the most important realization a person can have about their own existence. Think about your daily reality for a moment. The hierarchy decides when you wake up, where you spend most of your conscious hours, whether you can afford healthcare, and if you'll retire with dignity or work until you collapse. It determines whose ideas get heard and whose get dismissed. It shapes who you're allowed to be, and yet we're taught to see it as protection, as order, as the only thing standing between us and chaos. Part 2. The machinery of extraction. Let's talk about what hierarchies actually do, not what they claim to do. At their core, hierarchies function as resource funnels, as mechanisms that channel wealth, power, and opportunities upward to a concentrated elite while keeping everyone else in a state of managed scarcity. This isn't a bug, it's the entire design. The numbers are staggering when you actually look at them. In modern corporate hierarchies, executives at the top can earn 300 times what the average worker makes. 300 times. Not because they work 300 times harder or produce 300 times more value, but because the structure itself concentrates resources at the top while relying on what researchers call labor coercion at the bottom. Here's how that coercion works in practice. Your manager has information you don't have. They know the real value of your labor, the actual profit margins, the budget allocations. You don't. This information asymmetry becomes a tool. They can pressure you into high-effort tasks, convince you that there's no money for raises, make you compete against your co-workers for scraps, all while the people above are hoarding resources and opportunities. You're working harder every year, but your paycheck barely moves. That's not personal failure, that's systematic extraction. And this pattern repeats across every type of hierarchical organization, including corporate, non-profit, governmental, and religious. Small groups at the top control decision-making and wages, creating what sociologists call hierarchical triangles, where power gets narrower and narrower as you move up. The person at the peak has veto power over everyone below, while the person at the bottom has no power over anyone. This isn't coordination, this is control. Part 3. The lies we're taught to believe. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Hierarchies don't just take your money and time, they take your mind. They require elaborate ideologies to justify themselves and stories that make exploitation look like natural order. Throughout history, dominant groups have created stunning arrays of myths to explain why some people deserve to be on top and others deserve to be crushed underneath. The caste system justified permanent subjugation through religious concepts of past life sins. Slavery in America used pseudoscientific theories claiming black people were biologically inferior. Colonialism painted entire populations as primitive and childlike, and they needed to be civilized by their oppressors. Every hierarchy generates its own mythology that transforms human cruelty into cosmic necessity. And these aren't just historical curiosities. Modern hierarchies still rely on dehumanization, the process of ranking groups and then othering those at the bottom, stripping away their perceived humanity to make their mistreatment feel acceptable. When you can convince yourself that the people below you aren't quite as human, aren't quite as capable of suffering or joy or complexity, you can justify almost anything: mass violence, economic abandonment, systematic exclusion from opportunity and dignity. The most insidious part? These belief systems don't just exist externally, they get internalized. People at the bottom of hierarchies begin to believe the myths about their own inferiority. They develop lower expectations for themselves, engage in self-discrimination, police their own behavior to fit the roles assigned to them. The hierarchy becomes self-sustaining because it colonizes consciousness itself. When the oppressed start oppressing themselves, the system achieves its ultimate efficiency. Part 4. The cost to your humanity. Let's get personal about what this structure does to actual human beings trying to live actual human lives. The psychological damage isn't abstract, it's measured, documented, and devastating. Research shows that people at the top of hierarchies experience something researchers call hypoempathy. which is a decline in their ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Power literally rewires the brain, making relationships transactional, reducing human beings to their utility. That executive who can't understand why his employees are struggling. It's not that he's evil. The hierarchical position itself has impaired his capacity for empathy. Meanwhile, at the bottom, people develop what's called hyperempathy, which is an exhausting, constant awareness of the moods, demands, and unspoken expectations of those above them. Every worker knows this feeling. The emotional labour of managing your boss's temperament, the cognitive load of predicting what they want before they ask, the surveillance of self that never ends. This isn't sensitivity, it's survival, and it leads directly to burnout, that bone-deep exhaustion that sleep can't fix because it's not physical. It's existential, but it gets even more disturbing. Studies demonstrate that simply placing someone in a low-status position creates what psychologists call a cognitive load. The hierarchical position itself impairs executive function and performance on intelligence-related tasks. Being treated as inferior makes you perform worse, which then validates the hierarchy's judgment about your capabilities. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy built into the architecture of power. Part 5. What we're losing together. Beyond individual suffering, hierarchies actively prevent collective progress. They're designed to divide people who share common interests, creating artificial distinctions that prevent solidarity and mutual aid. Throughout history, ruling classes have used hierarchical thinking to keep working people from uniting. They found out that if they create racial hierarchies that give white workers superiority while paying them barely more than black workers, then suddenly they're not organising together for better conditions. They're competing for slightly better positions in the same exploitative system. Fragment people by rank, by department, by arbitrary status markers. And you ensure they'll never develop the social solidarity necessary to demand public goods, welfare, or dignity for all. Hierarchies also stifle the innovation they claim to promote. When vertical power dynamics suppress horizontal communication, valuable insights from people at the bottom never reach decision makers at the top. The intern who sees the obvious solution, the assembly line worker who knows exactly why the product keeps failing, the nurse who could revolutionize patient care. Their knowledge gets ignored because the structure values position over insight, credentials over competence. And perhaps most critically for our moment in history, hierarchical power structures resist environmental policies that threaten the status quo. The people benefiting most from the current fossil fuel extraction-based economy are the ones with the power to prevent change. They prioritize individual advancement over ecological balance because the hierarchy rewards personal accumulation, not collective survival. The planet burns while those at the top insist we just need to work harder and trust the system. Part 6. Breaking free from the invisible cage. So, what does any of this mean for someone just trying to get through their day? Understanding that the hierarchy is not your friend changes how you see your struggles. That feeling of inadequacy when you can't get ahead? That's not personal failure, it's systematic extraction. That exhaustion you feel after work that seems disproportionate to the physical tasks. That's the cognitive and emotional load of navigating power imbalances. That sense that something's fundamentally wrong with how we organise society. You're right, you're not crazy. You're awake. This awareness is the first step toward reclaiming your existence, your meaning, your consciousness from a system designed to exploit all three. You can't opt out of hierarchies completely as they're everywhere, but you can stop internalizing their myths about your worth, stop defending systems that harm you, stop mistaking order for justice. You can seek out horizontal relationships where power is shared rather than hoarded. You can build solidarity with people at similar levels of powerlessness instead of competing for slightly better positions. You can question every story you've been told about who deserves what and why. You can recognize that the anxiety, the loneliness, the burning sense that you're being used aren't character flaws. They're appropriate responses to an inappropriate reality. The truth is that hierarchies are very good at coordination, at creating order, and at providing a certain kind of psychological security, but they're even better at exploitation, at extraction, at convincing human beings that their suffering is natural and necessary. Recognizing this doesn't solve everything immediately, but it changes how you navigate what comes next. Because the invisible cage only works when you can't see the bars. And once you see them, you can never unsee them again. That's both the burden and the freedom of this knowledge. The knowledge the powers don't want you to know is the deep, dark, terrifying realization that the structure crushing you isn't inevitable, isn't natural, isn't your friend. It's a choice. And once the invisible cage is brought to light, choices can be changed.